Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
2 certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only 2 best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go.
Hi.
Hey.
It's a normal person. Yet another one. There's just a world full of them.
So many.
So many, like 7 billion?
Yeah, I think all of us.
8 billion? How many people are there in the world? Do you know?
I know a few years ago it was 6 and now it's more and it stresses me out. So I maybe don't want to know. But you're looking it up anyway, of course.
It's almost 7.6 billion. Oh, that was in 2018. So we're well past 7.6 billion now.
That's very stressful.
It says we're about 7.8 in 2020. So we're real close to 8 billion. That's just, that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, and it's...
Especially since I only really like a handful of them, and I don't, I couldn't be at a party with like 20, let alone 8 billion. Anyway, well, here's one of those almost 8 billion people.
Elise. Sorry, Elise, for going off the rails.
She's not special.
No, she is very special.
I wouldn't be highlighting her if she wasn't.
Exactly. That's why I asked her to be on this podcast. So today, she and I are getting into informational interviews as a really helpful tool for clarity in your career, in your life. It's like, find people who are doing what you want to do and just ask them about it. Sounds easy, but there's a lot of stuff that comes up.
People have a lot of hangups around this.
They do.
And also, I want to just say very sternly that this episode is not like something Kristen and I have a lot of expertise in. We're not that type of coach. Had you not listened to this podcast enough, you might get the idea that career coaching meant we'll help you figure out how to do informational interviews.
And write your resume.
No, that's not what we do. But obviously, that's a facet of eventually the process. Also, I don't think informational interviews have to be approached from a very logical place. I think that you can learn a lot and not be super attached to the outcome.
Oh, it's like you heard the interview already, which I know you haven't, but that's exactly what we talk about. Yeah.
Okay, see? There's a conscious way to go about it, which is maybe the point of this episode.
Exactly. This is about how to get over the hangups and the nervousness and the awkwardness and the connection that comes along with doing informational interviews. It's not really a how-to. It's more of like, ooh, this is vulnerable. How do we approach
Get over yourself
this?
And do it.
Yep.
As opposed to a how-to.
Exactly.
Or how to get over yourself so that you can do it and meet people and learn from them. And the last thing I feel like you should be trying to get out of an informational interview is using someone as a connection. I think that's sort of it could end up being that way, that they're like, oh, I actually think you'd be a great fit or something. I'm going to talk to my HR manager. But if that's why you're going into it, I don't think that's right.
Well, it also just kind of smells fishy.
Yeah. That's going on a date and being like, I'm actually just kind of using you because I feel like I'm going to get something out of you. And I'm like, people can smell that. It's kind of gross.
Yeah. And again, it's like, where this interview is going. Because we talk about how to make sure it's a win-win for you and the person who you're asking for information from.
Oh, yeah.
So
great.
it doesn't feel like you're just using people. That's not at all the point of this. That's not how you should approach it. And we get into that. So do you want to tell us a little bit about Elise?
Yeah, I'm reading her bio. Elise Austen is currently an assistant based in Chicago, navigating her 30s and trying to find the next step in her career. 3 months ago, she decided to jump into the unknown by booking a one-way flight to Europe, but she had to change course when the world threw her a curveball. Now she's using this forced pause to reevaluate her choices and get more intentional. Well, I hope you talk a little bit about the uncertainty of like having done that and then.
We do.
Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
All of it.
I had a client who quit her job right before the pandemic, and she actually has ended up in a job she's really excited about.
I've seen a lot of
So,
people
you wanna know
make
what?
big career changes in the middle of all this for the better.
Yeah, for sure.
It's certainly
She
possible.
was like, I actually feel like it all worked out exactly as it should. So,
Mhm.
well, this is good because I think a lot of us need to do this kind of thing and we don't know how, or we feel awkward, or we feel like it's not working.
Uh-huh.
So let's listen to what Elise has to say. We'll be back at the end.
Hi, Elise.
Hi. How are you?
I am pretty good, all things considered. Lots of change this year for everyone, but I'm right in the thick of it. So anyway, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. I feel like this is a long time coming since we've been working together for how long? Years now.
5 years, maybe?
I think you might be right. 4 to 5. Yeah, something like that. It's crazy. So we could have gotten into any number of topics. So many topics over the years. But today I'm going to hone it in. And I specifically want to focus on one thing with you, which is informational interviews. Because we talked about this in our most recent conversation. And honestly, I wish I could have recorded it because you had just like so much good insight about this. Like your experience with this is something I want so many people to hear because I think this brings up a lot of weirdness for people. So I apologize in advance for making you share all of this all over again with me. But it's just so good that this time I am going to record it.
Okay.
Okay, but before we get specifically into this topic of informational interviews, I always like to start out just having people like share their stories and a little bit of their background and how they got to where they currently are. Because they're probably like, who is Elise? I don't know who this is. So give a little context. So feel free to go back as far as you want. It could be back when we first started coaching, which, yeah, maybe 5 years ago. You were in grad school at the time. That's one of the first things I remember hearing from you.
Yeah.
So you can go back there.
there.
You can go wherever you want, but just kind of share like, how did you figure out what kind of work you want to do? What led you to your current situation, or just whatever else you want to share to give a little context first?
For sure. So we met, gosh, it must be 5 years ago when I was in grad school. And maybe 6 weeks into the program, I realized it was not a good fit. And I basically came to this quarter life crisis moment of sobbing in bed, not knowing what my passion was and what I wanted to do. I knew everything that it wasn't. And I looked at all my friends around me who just from the beginning, they knew what they wanted to do. And I was incredibly jealous.
Isn't that infuriating? It's just like, seriously?
Right. Everyone else but me. What's wrong
Yeah,
with
why
me?
is it so easy for everyone else? Yeah.
So honestly, that's when I found you and I found Rachel and I took the quiz and it started to clarify a few things about myself that I guess I didn't have the words to describe myself, of knowing I am a thriver. I like being in supportive roles. And it made me feel more comfortable in my own skin. And so when I didn't know what I wanted to do still. So I stuck with my program, even though it wasn't the right fit for me. And I used all that time that I had as a student, the summers and the extra hours and the vacations, to really hone in on figuring out what it is I enjoyed doing and understanding that I loved helping others and I wanted to be more of an assistant, and coming to terms and accepting like that is an acceptable, viable career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So fast forward to today, it wasn't easy. It wasn't linear by any means. I worked in a hospital. I worked for online retail. I worked in brick and mortar retail. I worked at a yoga studio. And now I've managed to be an assistant in a corporate setting for a little over 2 years now.
I cannot believe it's been that long.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it feels a lot longer, especially given the time right now. Working from
so
home.
true.
And I'll be transparent. Is it the right fit for me? No, it's definitely something that I've been struggling with on and off almost my full 2 years there. However, it's the work that I enjoy doing, and it's supporting people that I care about so much that makes it worth the while for me, as well as gaining the invaluable experience.
Yeah, it's absolutely on the right trajectory, even if it's not the end destination.
Right.
Yet.
And again, I think I always understood this would be more of a bridge job to get the experience and to figure out what is my next step. Because being an assistant, you can go into so many realms. And again, I am sitting, on square one, not knowing which direction to go in.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to get into that because you have gotten a little bit more clarity about that recently. But I want to go back to the beginning of your story here, because I don't want to gloss over the fact that you were 6 weeks into a grad school program knowing, this is not what I want. And I know so many people who have had their version of that experience. It might be, I just graduated college with this degree and I'm looking at jobs and I'm like, I don't like any of these jobs. I'm like down this path and something's wrong. Or there are people who are a couple of weeks or 6 months into a new job and they're like, this is not right at all. And that is such a scary feeling.
Yeah.
To be starting down a particular path and realizing, oh no, I don't think I like this path. And I think it's so encouraging for you to share, look, I realized that and I didn't know what to do about it immediately. And I didn't get on the path more directly that I wanted to be on for, a few years after that. But I stayed committed to continuing to get clarity on who I am and what I want. And eventually I moved off of like one train track onto the right train track. And there's still more to go. There's always more to go, right? I mean, that's life. That's being human. There's always the next phase and getting closer and closer to what's going to be the best fit for you. But now you at least feel like you're on the right train track. And that's not an overnight thing. There is some serious inner work. There is some serious kind of outer action that needs to happen to move over to a new track. But it is possible. And you're seeing where this is going now. And there's kind of a North Star of like, I know generally what direction I want to go in versus a few years ago, you didn't have that. And that's a really intense place to be. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for kind of bringing it to the present in a very real way, which is saying, hey, I've gotten a lot of clarity and I've gotten a lot closer to what I want. And I'm still figuring it out. And this still isn't like the mecca of where I want to be, but I see how this is leading to a closer version of that. I think that's really inspiring to people who might be back where you were in that, I think I'm on the wrong track and I don't know what to do about it and I feel stuck. You can change tracks.
Right. And honestly, there are two things that I want to point on in everything you just said. I think the first one is it really is a balance and a synergy between doing the inner work and the outer action. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I could be doing these outer actions right now had I not done the inner work first.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Because a lot of people really want to jump into outer action.
Absolutely. And I understand.
Faster.
I mean, that has been me. I mean, the outer action was me choosing to go to graduate school. Well, I hadn't done the inner work. Mm-hmm. So I kept kind of coming back to, it's a vicious cycle. You kind of start on this path and then before you know that path has circled all the way back around and you're back to where you started.
Yeah, right. It seems like the faster route to just jump into action, but you end up having to go back and do all the inner work anyway. So you might as well start there.
Right. And then the second thing that I kind of want to point out that you highlighted is by no means is this the mecca. I am still so much in the thick of it all that it almost, when you asked me to do this, I felt like I wasn't the right person because I'm not at that destination. I'm still so much in the middle of the journey. And even though I've come so far in understanding more about myself and clarity and what I want, the reason that I'm doing these informational interviews is because I'm not where I want to be, and I'm still trying to get there.
You just perfectly described why I love this segment of our podcast so much and why it's like maybe my favorite, even though I probably say that about everyone. But I love these like quote unquote normal people interviews because I think that's what life is. That's what people's experience is. That's what's so relatable, is to say, I've come really far and there's a lot further I want to go. And honestly, if there's a point at which you can't say that, I would start to get nervous. Like, if you've reached a peak, then like, what are we doing? What's the point? Obviously I want things to keep growing and feeling more and more and more aligned for you. But there's probably never going to be that mecca, and that's okay. So thank you for sharing that. And I think people are going to really appreciate that just very real take on it versus like the polished tips and tricks for living your best life, which I think is sometimes aspirational and kind of actually makes people feel bad about themselves. So, okay. So you were saying that lately you have felt called to do a lot of these informational interviews, largely because you've gotten quite a bit of clarity on what you want to do, but you're learning even more about this career path that's bringing up a whole new set of questions. So I want to just take a moment and recognize that in some ways, this is kind of a hard thing because everyone's experience with this pandemic has been so different. But in some ways, it has completely wrecked your plans. I mean, everyone's plans, but I know particularly for you, it has wrecked a lot of plans, or at least postponed a lot of plans and had you rethinking a lot of things. And you can share that if you want to or not or whatever. But I just feel like you have decided to use this time really wisely, which is what, like, I feel like having some extra time, being able to work from home, not being quite so crazy busy as a normal week typically would be, has given you the space to devote more time and energy to these informational interviews. So I guess I'm curious, where did that spark of an idea or motivation or inspiration come from to be like, if I'm going to have this time, I'm going to use it this way?
Yeah, well, I guess honestly, at the beginning of the pandemic, a few weeks, months maybe, time is such a fickle thing now.
Especially lately, yes.
I had made the decision that I had been at my job for about 2 years and I was ready to move on. And I've always wanted to live abroad. My relationship, my significant other lives abroad. And so I had decided I was willing to make the jump and quit my job, buy a one-way plane ticket there and start networking and try and find an assistant position over there in Europe. So this was really what I had decided that I wanted to happen for me mid-March. And within the day that I was going to give my notice was the day I was sent home early because of the pandemic.
How crazy is that? I mean, just like, talk about weird life synchronicities. Like, here you thought one big change was about to happen, and instead another completely unpredictable big change happens on that same day instead.
It was the weirdest. I don't know if it was the universe really like intervening, but holy cow, everything that I had been planning for that up until that moment. I mean, I was 2 weeks away from doing all of this and the world stopped.
Yeah, I know. I had to have a one-way plane ticket to another country and then to have a global pandemic hit that halts all travel, particularly international travel, and sends you home. It's like, you can't even travel to work, much less travel across an ocean.
Right. Oh my gosh. It was the craziest. I mean, one of the most surreal moments. And I live in a city. And so right away, I knew if this I could see the direction that things were going in. So immediately I packed up my bags and I drove home to my parents' house because they live in the country, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I thought it would be great to have some space, great to figure out what's happening in the world. And now that my plans have been firecrackered into a million different pieces, what's my next move?
Yeah.
Do I postpone it? How can I use this time to my advantage? Which, going back to your question, the decision I had made was not one that was an easy one. But looking back, even just a few months, I acknowledge that it was rather impulsive or crazy. I was quitting my job and moving overseas with nothing, no network, no prospects, no idea really even which city to look in. And while I'm not saying that wouldn't have worked out, I decided I wanted to be much more intentional, whether that at the end of quarantine.
Mm-hmm. I just want to really applaud your mindset in response to this. I'm sure you had your moments when you were just annoyed and defeated, and right, we all have had those moments, but you haven't gotten stuck there. I mean, I think a lot of people could hear that story and say, "Oh my God, you had this whole new life planned," or this vision of I'm going to be living in a completely different place, doing completely different work. And this unexpected pandemic comes out of the blue and throws all that out the window. You would have had every right to just settle into bitterness and anger and just throwing your hands up like, well, I guess I can't do anything now. And, just feeling like a victim to that situation. And again, I'm not saying you didn't have your moments because that would have been very understandable and normal. But on the whole, you're actually choosing to see this as a bit of a blessing in disguise, which is, you know what? Yep, I could have gone with my original plan, and maybe it would have been a little chaotic. Maybe it would have been a little bit of an adventure. I don't really know how it would have panned out. I'm sure in the end it would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
But since I can't go with plan A, maybe I can actually make plan B ultimately a lot better and smoother than plan A was. And maybe this is actually happening for a good reason for me, and choosing to see it that way and choosing to use this forced pause to be more intentional and to do this in a way that has more ease and more intention and a little bit more, detail and direction built in. That just proves the work you've been doing, frankly, is just what I want to say. Like that proves that the inner work that you talked about earlier that you have been doing for years now is getting tested in the middle of all of this. And it's proving that this is how you can just use your mindset, use your own kind of power of perception to make the best of any situation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely did have my moment of anger. However, again, it really was the universe essentially stopping me in my tracks and saying, you've made these impulse decisions before. And going back to what I was saying is you make these impulse decisions and not saying it doesn't work out the way you want it to, but there was never any intentionality behind it, that you didn't do the outer work, honestly, to figure out, is this the right path you want to go down?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like, here's an opportunity to do things a different way. So my go-to has been, hey, I'll figure it out as I go. And I just trust my intuition to kind of guide me each step along the way, which feels kind of freeing and exciting, but also a little bit stressful sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, I can do that like I've done before. Or maybe this is an invitation to approach things in a different way and see how that goes.
And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said previously it was just the mentality of you will figure it out as you go. Everything's going to be fine. And again, everything has always been fine. I've gained all these experiences. But like you said, this time it really was an opportunity to try and be more intentional and get my ducks in a row and gather as much information as I could with the time that I had in order to be really much more confident in the decision I was making, whatever that next decision is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this perfect segue into this whole topic of asking other people to help you gain that insight and gain that information. There's a lot of ways of researching a potential career path, of trying to gain clarity. Again, once you have some of that inner clarity of here's the kind of work, here's the kind of thing that I know suits me and aligns with who I am and what my values are and what my strengths are. But then actually going out and doing the outer action of figuring out what does that look like in the world and how do I bridge the gap between where I am and where I want to be. There's a lot of ways of collecting that information. So I first am curious, why did you decide to go the route of informational interviews as a way of gaining that information?
As I previously mentioned, in the assistant world, there are almost two sectors. You've got the corporate setting and you've got the private setting of working in households. And my entire life, I have seen the personal assistant work and put it on a pedestal and assumed the grass is always greener. You see all these assistants now, especially in reality TV shows, and you get this very distorted view of what you think it actually is. I've only ever worked in the corporate setting. And so again, I've always told myself the personal assistant is the beacon. That is the goal. And then I realized I don't actually know what that really entails on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met a personal assistant and talked to them about their experience. I only have what I see on TV and what I consume in front of, from social media. And that is not reality for most assistant positions.
Right.
And so I really decided I need to talk to more people. I need to figure out if I have glamorized this career or if maybe what I have right now is what I want.
Yes, so good. Yeah, I think so many of us have built-in interpretations of what different career paths are like. And we're responding more to our interpretations of what we think it is, more so than the reality. Because sometimes you just can't know what the reality is like because you haven't had that lived experience.
Exactly.
And doing research online or just reading job descriptions, kind of seeing the on-paper version, or like you said, sometimes the version that we see in film or TV or social media, that's not a real in-depth look at the lived experience of someone who's doing that work every day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's just nothing like people's stories. There's nothing like people doing the work, telling you, right, here's what the work is like.
Living that day to day for years on end.
Yeah. You just kind of can't replicate that in any other way. And it was very wise of you to recognize that interpretation that you had and to question it and to say, I don't want to glamorize this, and then get into something and realize I was dead wrong about what this is like in the real world.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, like for many listeners, where I was also is as a candidate looking, as a job seeker, I'm online and I see all these titles for position. And I don't know what so many of them entail. Like, how is an estate manager different from a household manager? How is a family assistant different from a personal assistant? And not really even knowing where to begin. Am I qualified for that role? What is that? Does that role entail me taking care of more of the family? Is that something I'm interested in doing? And again, like you said, no job description really gives you that information.
Yeah.
Only people who have been in the industry, who have seen the industry change, evolve, and experience that work life will know better than anybody what it's like.
Yeah, I love that. And just a quick side note on what you just said. It's something I want to emphasize and remind people that sometimes getting clarity actually means more questions come along with that clarity. So you got clarity about, I want to do assistant type work, which that was not clear a few years ago. but you recognized that work aligns with so many aspects of who I am. Great. It feels so good to get a sense of clarity and direction. And then you dive into it. You're like, oh my God. And now there's so many more questions that I have. There's so
Oh
many
my
more
gosh.
things to clarify. It's like you're peeling back the onion layers of clarity. And there's always another layer.
It really is. It never ends. And you always think, okay, now that I know I want to be an assistant, like my life is set. And then, like you said, you peel back a layer and you realize, oh, wait, there are two different environments. Which environment do I want to be in? And that's a whole nother layer that you have to figure out. And then when you get into the environment you want, you're always learning more about what you want out of life, you know? So be it. Like, yeah, I'm in an assistant role. I'm in a corporate setting. I have a great work in setup, let's call it. But again, now there's even more questions that I'm trying to get answered that I would never have thought were questions that I would have had 5 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Now you're seeing more of the nuances that you couldn't see when you were looking at it from afar. You're getting up close and personal and realizing, okay, there's more stuff to clarify, which is why it's so good to have tools to do, again, the internal introspection and making sure that you are always staying on course with what's most important to you, but also having some external tools of how do I keep getting more and more information to keep getting to the next layer of clarity that I need to get to. Okay, so, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I don't think you knew many people, maybe any people who were doing the kind of assistant work that you were attracted to, right? So in order to do informational interviews, it's not like you knew 50 people who you could just call up in your contacts on your phone and have like a comfortable conversation with, right? Like this was going to require reaching out to strangers.
Correct. I knew no one in the industry.
This right here is where most people get defeated. I'll tell you, like I've had this conversation where people are like, well, I don't know anyone. I don't even know like a friend of a friend. I don't have any contacts in this other industry that I'm interested in. So they'll just use that as a reason to not try this informational interview thing. But you didn't let that stop you. You did this very vulnerable thing of reaching out to a bunch of strangers. So first of all, how nervous were you about that?
Oh my goodness. I struggled for weeks because I had decided I would need to speak with people. And then I started doing the research on LinkedIn of honestly just typing in keywords, assistant, personal assistant, executive assistant, and going through hundreds of profiles of, does this person seem interesting? What appeals to me about this person? Do they have a career that seems interesting to me? Where are they located? Do they seem friendly via their picture? Just all these things to try and find a handful of people that, in my mind, I told myself at one point, someday down the road, I might just maybe reach out to them.
I love that. Yes. At first, it's just like, I'm going to find people and like, I don't know, maybe eventually I'll reach out. But then it's not scary to just find them. That's doable. So kind of talking yourself into just the next step. Okay, the next step is just find some people. The next step is to sift and sort from those people and see who might be interesting and relevant and open to having a conversation and sharing their insight with me. And then there was I'm sure the big step that was most resistant, which was actually contacting them. So, first of all, how did you overcome that resistance to hit send?
Honestly, I still struggle with it to this day. But when I was first starting off, I was very attached to the outcome. I have person A and I've drafted the note. And again, I was so attached to what I was saying. If I use this word, maybe they won't respond. If I don't word it just right, they're going to ignore it or think I'm asking too much of them. And so again, I sifted over what I was going to write. And I don't have LinkedIn Premium. I think you can only write a 300 character message. So trying to make it as catching but real was so difficult. And I had my drafts in my inbox for days. And I could not click send. I mean, everything was there and laid out. And it really, I had to accept rejection was going to happen. And no one is comfortable with accepting rejection. That's not an innate human reaction to be so open and welcome to rejection.
No, like that's just a built-in part of our wiring. We hate it. We try to avoid it. we want nothing to do with that feeling of rejection. It's awful.
And I guess as I'm speaking now, the truth is I sent one out the first day and I obsessively checked LinkedIn for 24 hours. And I was telling myself all these stories of my profile wasn't good enough. She didn't like what I wrote. I'm asking too much and taking it very personally. But the truth is, I don't know why I did not receive a message back. Maybe she doesn't check LinkedIn often. Maybe she did see it and then got busy. There were so many other realities or possibilities out there that I didn't want to accept because I didn't have control over that. And so the next day, I sent out the same message to maybe 45 people. Because if you have 45 people that you've reached out to, you can't keep track of all the people who are or are not responding to you.
I love that. Like, tricking yourself into not being able to focus too much on the outcome because there's too many outcomes.
Yeah, basically. And honestly, at the end of the day, I was like, someone has to respond. And again, no, they don't. But that's the lie that I told myself to ease myself into just clicking send repeatedly for 45 times in an hour.
Okay. No, I just have to pause because so much of this story is so good and so relatable. I think everyone has had that experience of having a vulnerable email that they've just written, whether it's like what you're describing, reaching out to a stranger, or maybe it's something that is making a big ask of your boss or something. You're like, ooh, this makes me uncomfortable. And it's all written out and you've played with the words and you've obsessed over every little phrase. And then it just sits. And then you have to actually hit the send button. And it's just like, it takes so much courage. So there's a lot of places where you could have stopped here. And that was one of them. One of them was, this is too scary. I'm just going to, one day, maybe I'll get up the nerve to do this, but not today. But there was a moment where you were like, just hit send, whatever, just hit send, and overcame that roadblock. Then there was the next roadblock of doing, again, the most normal human thing in the world, which was checking obsessively, right? Like, oh no, am I going to get rejected, right? The fear response is so real and it kicks in. Am I going to get somebody, completely ignoring me? Am I going to get somebody saying something vague and dismissive? Am I going to get somebody who's actually annoyed that I responded to them and gets upset with me? All the worst case scenarios pop into your head. And what I think is actually probably didn't feel great in the moment, but what is great about this story is the first person you reached out to did not respond.
No, and I don't think she has responded to this day.
And I have had a couple of clients who they're like, okay. I finally talked them into this whole idea of informational interviews, and they'll reach out to like one person, maybe two people, maybe even like 3 or 4 people on LinkedIn. No response. And they're like, oh, well, I tried. It didn't really work. So you could have let that stop. You could have been like, well, I tried, and clearly this is a stupid thing and it's not going to work and it feels awful and vulnerable. So that's it. You could have just been like, I tried, and moved on. But instead, you went to, I love that you went from 1 to the next day, 45. Because in a way, that's actually kind of easier. Like you recognized, okay, the thing that felt really hard about that first one was all of my eggs were in that one basket. All of my anxiety was focused on this one interaction. If I disperse it, a couple of things happen. One, statistically, I'm a lot more likely to get a response. Also, I can't focus on 45 people. Nobody can. So if I send that many out, I'm going to end up, it's almost going to diffuse my anxiety about doing this to the point that it's not laser focused on anything and it doesn't feel that bad. So that was actually another really wise step. It seems counterintuitive, okay, well, if 1 was that scary, why in the world would you make yourself do 45 the next day? But in a way, it's actually smart and wise and a little bit of an easier step to just do it as a big batch. So I love that. So You reached out to, close to 50 people in all, which I think is fantastic. You kind of tricked yourself into not getting super attached to the outcome, because I think that's where we'll really get tripped up, a lot of us, is being so attached. I need this person to respond, or else I'm going to feel stupid, or I'm going to feel bad, or I'm going to feel defeated, or whatever. When you don't have that attachment to the outcome, and when you've put a lot out there into the world and trusted, hey, at some point, someone's probably going to reach out and I'm going to get some of my questions answered, that starts to create a little bit more ease. And then out of 45, 46, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark, out of that many people that you initially reached out to, how many of them responded to you in some way, shape, or form? I know, not exact numbers, but just generally.
If we include just accepting the connection on LinkedIn, probably around 30.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more. If we just talk about people who accepted the connection and then responded via a message willing to speak with me, the number probably gets to be around 15, 20.
Okay. No, this is so good, because that means you might need to reach out to at least 2 to 3 people to even potentially get one response. And I'm betting there was a pretty big variation in how helpful those responses were too. I'm sure some people were, a little bit more kind of cursory in their response. Like, yeah, here's a couple of questions answered, whatever, or here's a place to go look. And then some people were incredibly helpful. So in order to get, before I even ask that question, I'm curious, of those people who responded, who actually wrote you back a message, how helpful have they been on the whole? And what was the range of that?
I would say that I've connected with, let's say, 10 people over the phone, of the ones who I had heard back from. And 2 of the women have been more helpful than I could have ever imagined. And I look at where I am now, and all of that fear was worth it just for these 2 women to come into my life, to provide me with support, answers, advice, mentorship now. And the remaining 8 that I've spoken to, I would say 3 of them were helpful and are very helpful still to this day. I don't feel as strong of a connection with them. And the others were a one and done phone call. But again, very grateful for their time and willing to be open and speak with me and pass along any information they need, and still be willing to keep an open door. It's just the conversations didn't flow, or they didn't feel as good. And some of those conversations I left and felt like I just wasted their time. I wasted my time. That was no fun.
Right. Well, honestly, that's normal, because you're 2 strangers having conversation about a career path, and you may or may not have the same goals. You may or may not have the same kind of personality traits. And you can't know that. That's the thing. You can't know that going in until you have that conversation. You don't know how helpful someone or some conversation is going to be to either person. And so you do have to reach out to enough people to end up finding the ones who are going to be incredibly helpful. So, okay, there's a lot that I want to get into here. But first, I just want to wrap this part in a bow and ask you to share a little bit about those 2 women. So 2 out of 45 people around have been incredibly helpful. And you said it was worth all the discomfort to make that connection with those 2 women. When you're talking super helpful, what are you talking about here? What does that mean? Does that mean you just had a really, really good conversation with them? Does that mean it's ongoing support? Describe those relationships that you've been building.
Yeah, of course. So one of the women lives in my city. It just so happened that I found her on LinkedIn, and she's been in the industry for 12 years. And our backgrounds are very dissimilar. However, because she's been in the industry for so long, the amount of knowledge she has is mind-blowing to me. And again, the way that she's been so helpful is she has an open door policy with me, and we schedule calls, and the first call we had scheduled for 20 minutes, and it went on for an hour and a half. And time again, I ask for just 15 minutes of her time, and the conversations go on for an hour, 2 hours. And I email her and she's open. I send her a quick little question, and she is so thoughtful in her responses that she'll give me, paragraphs worth of information that nothing on the internet even remotely came close to that. And again, because she's been in the industry, she has resources. Part of being an assistant is you gather up the contractors and the vendors that you like, and she's willing to share this information with me. And she's willing to connect me with other assistants and other recruiters that have worked for her. And that, again, is just such a generous and kind gift of her time, of her support, and just being there has been, I'm honestly at a loss for words every time I think about her, because again, we've never met. And she's here for me in a way that I am beyond grateful for. And the other woman lives in California, in an area that I initially was not interested in. But in speaking with her, she again is constantly open to me texting her. And her experience is so different from the woman in Chicago. They have very different experiences. And to get both of their insight into this world that is constantly changing and is amazing. And I honestly can just gush about them. But I think the point I want people to realize is I got two gifts out of reaching out to 45 people. And these two women are so different. And I'm grateful that they're different because, again, it gives me different insight. And their personalities are different. The way they interact in their working environment is very different. But again, it's all just been so helpful for me to be able to lean on these two people.
This is so valuable, and I wanted to let you just gush about them for a minute on purpose, because what you're describing is mentors. You have found mentors, and I have a lot of clients who are really craving that kind of mentorship in their career, and someone to guide them, to answer their questions, to help make introductions for them, who they admire, who they respect, who they can feel really open with. And there is that kind of open door policy. And a lot of times, if there's not a mentorship component built into their workplace, they'll assume they can't have that. There are some great workplaces that build that in, which I think is fantastic, but that's unfortunately more rare. And if it's not a formalized mentorship process, a lot of people feel like they don't have access to that. And you created this for yourself and have found your own mentors, which were complete strangers a few weeks ago.
Yes. And on top, like going off of what you're saying, I have been interested and I have been an assistant for a little over 2 years now. And again, my company does not have a mentorship program by any means. And I've always felt very alone in the work that I do because, like you said, I don't know anybody in this industry minus my coworker. And in speaking with these two women, but also everybody else, I was introduced to this whole world of assistance, that there are groups on Facebook, there are programs out there that if you do want to pay to find a mentor, that is an option. But again, I had no idea the breadth of the industry and did not realize how many resources there were out there available to me because I had never looked or put in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're making such another good point, which is, yeah, there are a lot of places that are maybe not within your company, but maybe it's organizations that are built around mentorship. And sometimes they cost money. And sometimes that's another hindrance for people is they feel like that's not accessible to me because I don't have enough disposable income to be able to pay for mentorship. And again, this was a free method that you developed. And one more piece of this, because I'm hearing some people, and I don't know if these people are actually saying this or if this is just my, made up version of what our listeners are thinking. But I could see some people being like, well, but is that like selfish or something to ask for that much guidance from someone, to ask for mentorship from someone? But I can just tell from the way that you're describing these conversations, you're asking for really, hey, 15 minutes here or a quick text question about something. This woman, the one in particular you mentioned first, but probably both of them and many, many of the others as well, they clearly are getting a lot of joy and fulfillment out of this. She's like, hey, you asked for 15 minutes. I'm here for you. I'm here for 2 hours if we need to be. I want to help. This brings people a lot of fulfillment to be able to give that guidance on the other side. So if there's any perception or worry or fear out there of, can I ask that much from someone else? When it really gels, when you find the right mentor, it's truly a win-win. They feel very fulfilled in helping you, and you feel very appreciative and supported and guided by what they're able to share with you. It's synergistic.
Exactly. And honestly, I also had a similar belief when I was reaching out to people of, does this not feel like I'm using them? I'm asking something from them, but I'm not providing them with anything. I really am reaching out because I'm trying to get something from them. And that is advice or knowledge or insight. And then I was speaking to someone about this, and she said, let them make that decision. Let them decide if they're willing to give that to you. All you can do is ask. And then it's up to them. If they don't want to speak to you, they don't have to. And so
amen. Yes, I love that.
It's up to them to make the decision if they want to speak with you. And again, it's really up to them if they want to keep that conversation going with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had plenty of conversations where they were more than happy to get on the phone with you for 30 minutes or whatever. And then that was that. And that was what they were comfortable giving. And you thanked them for what they were willing to provide and moved on. I just think it's so funny. This is one of the cool parts about being a coach is I get to talk to so many different kinds of people. And one of the unifying things about almost everyone I work with is they really want to feel fulfilled. And how they define that typically means I want to help and support other people.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make a difference in other people's lives, even if it's just one person or even if it's just their small community or whatever. That is fulfilling to them. And oftentimes they don't have an outlet for that. Their work doesn't necessarily give them that, or maybe they're trying to find work that does, but currently they don't have that. So not everyone is going to want to give and support others in this vehicle of mentorship, but the people who do and who respond really well and who are really excited to help you out in that way, you might actually be fulfilling as much of a need for them as they are for you, because that might be one of their most direct ways of helping and supporting another person. And that might give them a huge boost of fulfillment that they can't get elsewhere. So again, you don't have to force everyone to be your mentor. In fact, I don't think you want just anyone to be your mentor anyway. But if you're willing to reach out to enough people to have some connections with the few, kind of like the top tier who are going to be the right fit for you, then it can feel very, very balanced and healthy and reciprocal.
Yeah, I think you're really getting right to the point of there's so few of us out there that know exactly what it is we want to do and are so good at staying on track and having a plan and sticking to that plan that I think we all appreciate the guidance and want to help out others, as hopefully someone's kind of helped us out as well. That was very poorly stated, by the way. My apologies.
Perfectly clear. Well, and I'll just because I think this is kind of an interesting comparison, you just shared the feelings of being the one asking for support and asking for mentorship and guidance. And I often am someone who gets asked by people who are interested in coaching. So I'll have people who just find us on our site and they're like, oh, you have a coaching business. I'm interested in becoming a coach. And they'll ask me for informational interviews. So I'm on the receiving end of that sometimes. And I'll tell you, I love doing that. As often as I possibly can, as long as my schedule allows, which I try to make sure it does, I want to have conversations with those people. I want to be an ongoing sense of guidance and giving them a real taste of what this work is like, not just the Instagram version of what a coach is. And I love doing that. I mean, maybe that's because that's what I do as a coach, is I love to help and support people. This is just one more avenue to do that. But I think a lot of people feel the same way. So if you're worried about that, just know you might actually be giving a gift to someone else by giving them the opportunity to help someone.
Yeah.
Okay, this is so fantastic. And I'm wanting to wrap this up by you sharing with anyone who's listening, who's back a few steps behind you, which might be, I am curious about this idea of informational interviews, or I know that I want some more clarity on my career path, but I feel super nervous about this. Maybe I'm more introverted. Maybe this just feels really vulnerable to me. And they're like, yeah, that's cool that she did that, but I don't know if I can do that. What would you tell that person? What advice would you give to that person, having now been on the other side and seeing how valuable it was?
I would say that it's like working out and flexing a muscle. If I don't keep doing this, I can very easily see myself getting back to that point of having that fear in me. It's not easy. And I don't necessarily know if it gets easier, but we become more comfortable in pushing ourselves a little bit. And for me, really, the breaking point is the uncertainty, discomfort that I have in my present life now, is that worth it? Or is it worth it for me to get a little bit uncomfortable, be vulnerable for those 20 seconds that it takes me to click send in order to get something out of it at the end of the day?
Oh, okay. That is so good. Essentially what I just heard you say was, would I rather be uncomfortable for 5 seconds to hit send on an email, or would I rather be uncomfortable by my lack of clarity for days, weeks, months, years of my life? So it might be really, really intense, focused discomfort for 30 seconds in this moment, or this low grade, just kind of slight feverish kind of discomfort for way longer. Kind of gets down to just like, how bad do you want the clarity? How much do you really want the answers?
I feel like so often, at least for me, I've sat in the discomfort that I have, and I'm okay with that because it's what I know. And I'd rather know what the discomfort I have now is versus even trying a new type of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, I had to kick myself in the butt and say, I don't want to live in this space that I'm in anymore. I need a change, and change requires that vulnerability. And it's not easy, and it's scary, and I'm still going through it, like I said previously. And I still have these calls. I still am having calls with people. I have one later today, and am I nervous? Absolutely. I have no idea what I'm going to say, and I'm not sure how the conversation will go. And I had a conversation yesterday, and it did not go really well, and it felt like a waste of time, and I left it feeling very uncomfortable. But again, it's continuing to have these conversations that keeps me going forward and realizing there's more out there, and that I don't have to stay in the discomfort that I previously had.
Yeah, right.
Find a new one.
Well, and the more times you practice this new form of discomfort, doesn't mean all of a sudden it doesn't feel uncomfortable anymore. It still does, but it's not so intense. So we had that conversation yesterday. Okay, not great, feeling a little weird after it, like not the best use of anyone's time. But you'd kind of worked your way up to that. So if you'd started with that, that would have probably felt like, oh my God, I'm just quitting this whole thing. This feels too scary. I hate this.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, you know what? I've done some uncomfortable things leading up to this. I've had some really, really great responses. This one was meh, but I've almost like numbed myself a little bit, like taken the edge off the discomfort by doing it enough times. This is reminding me. So just last week on our Dear Rachel that came out, Rachel and I referenced an older podcast episode with Alex Grodnick about rejection therapy. And how it's a really great episode. It's a super uncomfortable one, but like he makes it really comfortable because he's so chill. But it's about what you're saying. It's about practicing discomfort in little ways. So you flex that muscle, just like you said, and it gets not easy, but slightly easier as you go. So it's okay to work your way up. Absolutely. And I'll link to that episode again this week. I guess that's maybe a theme. Maybe we're asking people to do some rejection therapy. It keeps coming up.
I'm so honored I'm tied to that podcast.
It's a good one, right? You remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
I know you're a loyal podcast listener, and that makes me happy. And now you get to be on the other end of it. How fun.
I'm so honored for that too.
Well, thank you so much, Elise, for coming on and sharing this story and telling many of these things to me again. Although, in all honesty, I was like, I wanted to record last week's conversation, but I feel like we just took it even a step further today, just knocked it out of the park. So I am very excited for people to hear this. I would love to hear from anyone who is inspired to do some informational interviews after this and share that experience too, because I think we could use all the proof that we can get that this is worth the discomfort.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Or thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for your time and your generosity and being kind of a mentor to others with this, actually, to inspire and encourage them. So we'll say goodbye on the podcast, but this is not goodbye for you and I because we'll be talking again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So if you like this episode with Elise, Kristen put together a few other recommendations for you for your listening pleasure. One is a blog that you wrote 2 years ago, May 2018, why you should get down with informational interviews. That's kind of on the nose.
Yeah, I figured if you like this topic, you can get Elise's take on it here and my take on it there.
Okay.
And then we talked about this one last week, but it came up again in this conversation with Elise. So I want to point you back to Rejection Therapy with Alex Grodnick from back in June 2019, because you're going to get rejected a lot when you ask for informational interviews. It's just going to happen. So you might as well build up your tolerance for it.
And then one of my favorites, a normal person interview, Finding a Dream Job After Years of Searching with Tianka Shepard from September 2018. Just like having the faith that things are going to work out, even when it's taking you a lot longer than you wanted to get your job or really anything.
Yeah, that one related to Elena's story because we've been working together for a few years and she's come a long way, but there's more to go.
Okay, so we will be back. Will we be back? I think we will. I think we'll be back on Tuesday with a new Magic 8 Ball episode.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going to be your choice.
Yeah.
So you get to choose what we're bringing back.
I haven't chosen yet, but it's going to be a good one.
Everything we do is good. That's obvious.
Guaranteed.
All right. Bye.
Bye.